Hello, everybody. Today we are going to be discussing an alternate reality scenario where Serbia accepted Austro-Hungarian's ultimatum in 1914. Now, before we jump into the scenario, there's some background information we need to understand. This includes two very important historical figures. The first being Dragutin Dmitrijevic. His nickname was Apis. He was born in 1876 in Belgrade, and he chose to go to military school, eventually rising through the ranks of the Serbian military, and by the end of the 1890s, the general staff of the Serbian army. Now, in 1901, he led a failed assassination against Alexander Urbanovic. Later, then, eventually, he led a successful raid on the capital with fellow officers from the Serbian military, killing Alexander Urbanovic. Later on in his career, he was eventually a founding member of the Black Hand in 1911. Eventually, in 1914, it came to his attention that the Black Hand was contemplating assassinating Franz Ferdinand after he announced his trip to Sarajevo. Apis jumped at this opportunity to support the Black Hand with guns, bombs, and munitions, as well as safe passage into Bosnia. A quote to better describe this man is: he was resolute and wise, and had a shrewd political mind. He thought and acted by himself without seeking the advice of others, and once a decision was made, he went straight ahead with an iron will, without hesitation, without change of mind. He was a man of the utmost secrecy. He never spoke of his intentions, nor his share in events. Milan Zivanovic, 1937. The second historical figure we need to take a look at is Prime Minister Nikola Pašic. He had been prime minister for Serbia consecutively from 1904 until 1926. Throughout Apic's attempts to gain political control and get at the Habsburg monarchy through violent attempts, Nikola eventually found out about Apic's coordination with Black Hand to strike at the Habsburg monarchy in Sarajevo. Eventually, during the July crisis, Nikola would be the glue that Serbia needed to keep them together, as they were suffering a lot from political turmoil, nationalism in the press, and competing civil and military governments. One other thing we need to touch on before we jump into the actual alt history is the problems that Serbia was facing at this time in its history. One of these was there was an extreme amount of nationalism in the press. An example of this comes from Leon Discus. On July 1st of 1914, he sent a message to Paris saying the press displays no regret at the surprising incident. They project any responsibility for what has happened on the Austrian regime of national repression. So during this time, the press was very much pushing the idea onto the people that this was completely the Austro-Hungarian Empire's fault, and it had nothing to do with their own government, and that this was the righteous steps for the Serbian state to take. As well as this, the civilian government had problems with keeping the military government in check. As stated before, Apis had used his power to overthrow the previous government, killing the king and queen. And as well as this, he's been using his power to go behind the civilian government's back and support the Black Hand in assassination attempts. So now that you understand the background of kind of what's going on in Serbia at this time, we can jump into how what I believe would happen if Serbia were to accept these demands. The stage is set. It is early morning of July 24th, and Belgrade receives a telegram from their ambassador in St. Petersburg. It says, he said we could count on Russian help, but he did not explain what shape or form that help would take. Sazonov advised us if we cannot defend ourselves, then we must do like Bulgaria last year. That would cause a protest from other states against Austro-Hungary. I, Spalajovic, told him, Spasnov, that his advice would be practical if we would be sure that Austria-Hungary only wanted to invade the border areas. Sazonov answered that everything depends on our capability to defend ourselves. Money and valuables should be sent to Greece and the army retreat if necessary. This was a historical telegram that was sent to the government in Belgrade about the Russian response 1 and 2 days after the Austrians had sent Serbia the 48-hour ultimatum. Now, I could see in this scenario that Nikola is a lot more taken aback by this statement and is less likely to try and negotiate the terms placed on Serbia. Now, with that being said, eventually Nikola responds to Vienna, stating that they accept all terms of the ultimatum, and this eventually throws Serbia into complete disarray. Apis would organize an officer's coup against the civilian government because he would see this as a detriment to the idea of creating a greater Serbian state. Furthermore, the population would be outraged. As stated before, the press was being very nationalistic and pushing the blame on the Austro-Hungarian Empire, leaving Serbia out of fault for this whole thing. So if Nikolai were to cave and accept to the Austrian demands, I could foresee either a revolt, potential revolution, but at least mass discontent throughout the entire Serbian population. So then this brings us into a point of where does this go for Serbia? With Apis leading an entire coup of the nation, with it most likely being successful, I could see Serbia becoming a military dictatorship similar to how Germany became one in 1917. So the first timeline I have here is that in this disarray, Austria goes ahead and declares war, even though Serbia agreed to all 10 demands, eventually sparking the First World War the exact same as it did in our timeline. The Russians come to the aid of the Serbians, and the Germans declare war on Russia, and so forth. The differences I see coming in them is it's Austria would be able to overrun the Serbians a lot faster than they did in our timeline. However, Apis would be a lot more inclined to fight a guerrilla war. So I could see that the occupation of Serbia would happen a lot faster, but Austria would be tied down in guerrilla warfare. As well as this, Bulgaria would remain neutral until the Romanians joined the war in 1916. Other than that, everything else pretty much stays the same. The Italians joined in 1915, the Black Sea raids happened, the Ottomans joined the war. At this point, the rest of the war carries out pretty close to how it did in our timeline. I don't see this leading to the victory of the Central Powers. The Entente would eventually be victorious. The only differences that I maybe could be seeing is that the formation of Yugoslavia gains potentially more land from the Austrians. The peace deal is a little harsher. If not, it is all completely the same to our timeline. Now let's jump into one that I feel is both likely and unlikely, but I feel is a lot more interesting than the previous one. So in this timeline, the Austrians receive the accepted ultimatum and they see no reason to go to war. The Kaiser Wilhelm II sees that Serbia has agreed, and he tells Austria that there is no reason for us to go to war. And even in our own timeline, when the Serbians agreed to 9 out of the 10 conditions Kaiser Wilhelm II said, even then he did not see no reason for war. So this could potentially lead to a reality where Austria does not declare war in July of 1914. However, tensions between the two states will still be very high because both the civilian and military leadership of Austria-Hungary were very eager to go to war with Serbia. One way I could see the First World War kicking off is now with a more militaristic and dictator-like government. The Serbians would forcefully remove the Austrians in their country that are there to do the investigations and the judicial process for the members that they believe are involved with the assassination of Franz Ferdinand. This eventually causing the Austrians to declare war on Serbia. Then the Russians, I could see coming again to the aid of the Serbians, as they themselves would like to see a Serb state in the Balkans, potentially friendly to Russia, and that they would have a lot of influence over. Then again, this kicks off the same way that Germany then declares war on Russia, France declares war on Germany, and the rest of the Great War plays out the exact same. Another idea is after this coup, the Serbians go and try to invade Albania. This is very historically unlikely. However, I could foresee this potentially happening because the whole reason that Albania came to exist is because in the First Balkan War, the Serbians had gained that Albanian land, giving them access to the Adriatic and Mediterranean seas, but they were forced to leave that area because the Austrians wanted to create an independent Albanian state, not only to further their influence in the Balkans, but also to deny the Serbians access to the sea. So this preemptive attack into Albania would absolutely trigger a war with the Austrians. Less likely in this scenario, it is possible that the Russians would try to get involved as well, again, for the same reasons of creating a stronger state in the Balkans that they can rely on and influence. However, I can see a lot of major differences being in this outcome. Uh, I could definitely foresee Bulgaria joining the war a lot sooner. The Greeks would be on edge about the Serbian invasion and may potentially look more to be joining the Central Powers, especially since the king of Greece was already sympathetic to the Central Powers at the time. Italy wanting to exert influence into the Balkans could potentially be a little more wary about joining the Entente because they would no longer have the basis to demand that Albania becomes an Italian protectorate if it is a part of Serbia. However, I could also see the Italians still joining the Entente with the promises of gaining Tyrol and the other Austrian provinces that they wanted. As well as the Ottomans would still join the Central Powers as the Germans would coerce them into doing the Black Sea raid on Russia, and Romania would still join the Entente because they want Transylvania back from the Hungarians. A third option that is extremely unlikely, but is an interesting one to think about, is the Serbians are so tied down with the police and the judicial branches of Austria-Hungary being in Serbia that after a year or two, so in 1915 or 1916, the Bulgarians go and start a third Balkan War, as they had lost Macedonia from the Serbians and they wanted Thrace from the Greeks as well as land the Romanians had taken during the Second Balkan War. Now, with a Bulgarian invasion into Serbia, I could potentially see the Austrians then using their already influential base in Serbia as a way to then have a preemptive attack of their own, eventually leading to the Russians coming to the aid of the Serbians, and then World War One kicks off, roughly the exact same. However, in this timeline, the Ottoman Empire would end up joining the Entente as they would be promised by Britain and France their total gains back to Bulgaria, which they had lost during the First Balkan War, as well as opening their markets for trade after the war and able to keep the Ottoman economy stable. As you can see in my examples, no matter what the First World War kicks off, and that is because I strongly believe that no matter what the Serbians did in this instant, the First World War is going to happen somehow, some way. Even if Nikola prevented Apis from properly supplying the Black Hand and commencing the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, no matter what, the First World War is going to kick off some way. So, unfortunately, in these scenarios, I do not see a way where Serbia accepting the ultimatum leads to a world of peace. Thank you all very much for watching. I appreciate you being here, and I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know in the comments what you think, what I can improve on, and I will see you for the next potential history video I make. Thank you.